The dog had destroyed half his fence, trampled his vegetable garden, and was currently drinking from his horse trough like it owned the place. Xavier Hartley stood on his porch with his rifle held loosely at his side, more out of habit than intention, watching the mangy creature lap up water in the blazing Montana afternoon sun. His homestead sat 3 miles outside of Granite, a mining town that had seen better days before the silver played out, and visitors were rare enough that he noticed the dust trail coming up the road long before he could make out who was raising it. The woman appeared as a shimmer at first, heat waves distorting her figure as she walked with purpose toward his property. She wore a simple cotton dress that had seen many washings. The blue fabric faded to almost gray, and her dark hair was pinned back in a practical bun that had started to come loose. Even from a distance, Xavier could see the determination in her stride, the way she held her shoulders back despite what must have been exhaustion. It was June of 1889, and the Montana summer showed no mercy to anyone foolish enough to walk 3 miles in the afternoon heat. The dog finally noticed her and bounded over with enthusiasm that seemed impossible given the temperature. Xavier watched as the woman bent down to grab the mutt by what remained of its rope collar, her face flushed red from exertion and sun exposure. She was younger than he had first thought, probably mid-20s, with features that would have been pretty if they were not currently set in an expression of mortification. Xavier set his rifle against the porch railing and waited. He had been alone on this property for 4 years now, ever since his brother had died in a mining accident and left him the deed. The isolation suited him most days. Other days, it sat heavy on his chest like a stone. The woman reached his fence line, or what remained of it after the dog's destruction, and stopped to catch her breath. Up close, Xavier could see that her eyes were an unusual shade of amber, almost golden in the sunlight. She was perhaps 24 or 25, and there was something about the set of her jaw that suggested she was no stranger to hard circumstances. "I am so deeply sorry," she began, her voice hoarse from the walk. "I was passing through on the road and he got away from me. I tried to catch him, but he is faster than he looks. I will pay for the damages. I do not have much money with me now, but I can work off whatever I owe you. I am good with mending and cooking and cleaning and just about anything you might need done." Xavier descended the porch steps slowly, studying her. There was dust on her dress and her face, and her hands showed the kind of calluses that came from real work. The dog sat at her feet now, panting happily, completely oblivious to the chaos it had caused. "Where are you from?" Xavier asked. His voice sounded rough even to his own ears. He had not spoken to anyone in nearly 2 weeks. "But," she said, "I was staying there with my aunt after my father passed last winter, but she has her own family to care for, and I did not want to be a burden any longer. I thought I might find work in one of the smaller towns. I heard Granite might need a school teacher or perhaps someone to help at the general store." "Granite is dying," Xavier said bluntly. "The mines are mostly played out. People are leaving, not coming. There is not much work to be had." The woman's face fell, but she recovered quickly. "Then I will keep moving until I find something, but first I must make things right here. Please, let me at least fix your fence. I know how to handle tools." Xavier looked at the wreckage of his garden, the broken fence posts, and the hopeful expression on the woman's face. He looked at the dog, who was now lying on its back with its legs in the air, completely content. He looked back at his empty house, at the years stretching ahead of him in solitude, and made a decision that surprised even himself. "What is your name?" he asked. "Rebecca," she said. "Rebecca Kincaid. Xavier Hartley." "That fence will take at least 3 days to repair properly. Rebecca Kincaid. The garden is a loss for this season, but the fence needs doing before my horses decide to wander off. If you are serious about working off the debt, you can start tomorrow morning. You will need a place to stay. There is a room in the house that was my brother's. It has a door that locks from the inside. You will be safe there." Rebecca's eyes widened. "I could not possibly stay in your house. What would people say? The nearest neighbor is 5 miles south." "I do not imagine they will have much to say about it. You can sleep in the barn if you prefer, but there are mice and it gets cold at night even in summer. The room is empty and going to waste." She hesitated, warring with herself. Xavier could see the exhaustion in every line of her body, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. She had probably been walking since dawn. "Just for a few nights," she finally said, "until the fence is done and my debt is paid. Then I will continue on to the next town." "Fair enough," Xavier said. He gestured toward the house. "You should get out of this sun before you collapse. There is a pump in the kitchen. Get yourself some water and rest a bit. We can discuss the details of the work over supper." Rebecca looked like she wanted to argue, but thirst and exhaustion won out. She climbed the porch steps carefully, the dog trailing behind her. Xavier noticed that despite her obvious need, she wiped her feet carefully on the mat before entering his home. Inside, the house was sparse but clean. Xavier kept things tidy out of habit, more than any real concern for appearances. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a simple wooden table with 2 chairs. There were 2 bedrooms off to the side and a small washroom that his brother had insisted on building after striking it rich in the mines, before the luck had run out. Rebecca went straight to the pump and worked the handle until water flowed. She cupped her hands and drank deeply, then wet her handkerchief and pressed it to her face and neck. The dog immediately stuck its head under the stream of water. "What is his name?" Xavier asked, nodding at the animal. "Rufus," Rebecca said. "He belonged to my father. I could not bear to leave him behind, even though he makes everything more difficult. I know that is foolish." "We all have our burdens," Xavier said. He moved to the ice box and pulled out a jar of cold tea he had made that morning. "Drink this. You need more than water after that walk." Rebecca accepted the jar with grateful hands. She drank half of it in one go, then seemed to remember her manners and slowed down. "Thank you. You are being far kinder than I deserve, given what Rufus did to your property." "The fence was already in need of repair," Xavier admitted. "Your dog just moved up my timeline, and the garden was not doing well anyway. The soil here is difficult." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Xavier was acutely aware that he had not been alone in a room with a woman since before his brother died. Rebecca seemed equally uncomfortable, her eyes darting around the space, taking in the details of his life. "I should show you the room," Xavier said finally. He led her down the short hallway to the second bedroom. It was small but adequate, with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the empty prairie. "Bedding is clean. I wash everything once a month whether it needs it or not. The door has a good lock." Rebecca stepped inside and ran her hand over the quilt on the bed. "This is too generous. I really could sleep in the barn." "You could," Xavier agreed. "But you will work better after a good night of rest in a proper bed. It is practical, not generous." She smiled at that, just a small curve of her lips, but it changed her whole face. Xavier felt something shift in his chest, a feeling he had forgotten was possible. "Then I accept your practical offer," Rebecca said. "Thank you, Xavier." The way she said his name, soft and genuine, made him turn away quickly. "I will start supper in an hour. Rest until then." He retreated to the kitchen and stood at the window, watching Rufus explore the yard. The dog had already found a shady spot and collapsed in a heap. Xavier wondered what exactly he had just agreed to. 3 days of having another person in his house, of conversation over meals, of another heartbeat in these walls. It felt dangerous and necessary all at once. He pulled out supplies to make a simple meal. Bacon and beans and cornbread, the kind of food he made for himself every night. But then he found himself adding extra care to the preparation, making sure the beans had enough seasoning, that the cornbread would be light and not heavy. He had not cooked for anyone else in so long that he had almost forgotten how. When Rebecca emerged an hour later, she had cleaned up and re-pinned her hair. Her face had lost some of its redness, though her nose and cheeks were definitely sunburned. She had also changed into what must have been her other dress, a worn brown thing that fit her better than the blue one had. "Can I help with anything?" she asked. "You can set the table," Xavier said. "Plates are in that cabinet there." They worked in companionable silence, moving around each other in the small kitchen. It felt strange and right all at once. When the food was ready, they sat across from each other at the table. Rufus positioned himself exactly between them, clearly hoping for scraps. "This is delicious," Rebecca said after her first bite. "Much better than anything I can make." "I doubt that," Xavier said. "But I have had a lot of practice. When you live alone, you either learn to cook or you starve." "How long have you been out here by yourself?" "4 years. My brother and I came to Montana together in 1883, hoping to strike it rich in the mines. He did for a while. Bought this land and built this house. Then there was a collapse in the mine and he was killed along with 7 other men. I kept the property and left the mining life behind." "I am sorry for your loss," Rebecca said quietly. "I know what it is like to lose family. My mother died when I was 12. It was just my father and me for many years. He was a carpenter, a good one, but he got sick last winter and the doctor bills took everything we had saved. I sold our house in Helena to pay the debts and went to stay with my aunt in Butte. Helena is a long way from here." "I have been traveling for a while," Rebecca admitted. "Trying to find a place that feels right, somewhere I might build a new life. I have been alone in the world before, but not like this. Before, I always had my father." Xavier nodded. He understood that particular kind of loneliness, the kind that came from losing the last person who really knew you. They ate in silence for a while, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had both spent too much time alone and had forgotten how to fill the empty spaces with meaningless words. "What will you do if Granite has no work?" Xavier asked eventually. Rebecca shrugged. "Keep going west, I suppose. There are new towns starting up all the time. Surely one of them needs a school teacher or a seamstress or someone to cook in a boarding house. I will find something eventually. That is a hard way to live, especially for a woman alone." "I am discovering that," Rebecca said. "But what choice do I have? I will not marry just for security, and I will not be a burden on anyone who does not truly want me there." There was pride in her voice and determination. Xavier found himself respecting her more with each passing moment. She was not looking for rescue. She was just trying to survive with her dignity intact. After supper, Rebecca insisted on washing the dishes. Xavier did not argue. He went out to check on his horses and make sure they had fresh water and feed. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air had cooled down to something almost pleasant. Rufus followed him to the barn and immediately began investigating every corner. "Your dog is going to scare my horses," Xavier called back toward the house. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a towel. "Rufus, come here right now." The dog ignored her completely, too busy sniffing around the hay bales. Xavier watched Rebecca march over and grab the dog by the collar. Rufus finally acknowledged her existence by licking her face enthusiastically. Despite herself, Rebecca laughed. It was a warm sound that seemed to fill up all the empty spaces in the yard. "He is completely useless and has no manners whatsoever," Rebecca said, but there was affection in her voice. "I do not know why I keep him." "Because he was your father's," Xavier said simply. "Because he is a connection to what you have lost." Rebecca looked up at him, surprise clear in her amber eyes. "Yes," she said quietly. "Exactly that." They stood there in the fading light, a woman and a dog and a lonely cowboy, and something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, a recognition of kindred spirits. "I should let you get some rest," Xavier said finally. "Dawn comes early. We will start on the fence after breakfast." Rebecca nodded and led Rufus back toward the house. Xavier stayed in the barn longer than necessary, checking and rechecking things that did not need checking. He was stalling, he realized, putting off the moment when he would have to go back inside and feel the presence of another person in his space. It had been so long since he had to navigate around someone else's rhythms, someone else's needs. When he finally went inside, the house was quiet. A lamp burned low in the kitchen, left on for him. Rebecca's door was closed. Xavier could hear Rufus snoring on the other side of it. He prepared for bed in the washroom, then lay in his own bed staring at the ceiling. It was strange, knowing someone else was sleeping just on the other side of the wall. Strange, but not bad. The house felt different, more alive somehow. Xavier had not realized how much he had been living like a ghost, going through the motions of existence without really being present. Rebecca's arrival had shaken something loose in him, some calcified part of his heart that he had thought was permanently frozen. He fell asleep thinking about amber eyes and the sound of unexpected laughter. Morning came with the crow of a rooster Xavier kept for eggs and company. He rose and dressed quickly, then started coffee and breakfast. He was frying eggs when Rebecca emerged from her room, already dressed and ready for work. She wore the blue dress again, and she had tied her hair back with a strip of cloth. "Good morning," she said. "What can I do to help? Coffee is ready. Eggs will be done in a minute. There is bread in the box there if you want to slice some." They fell into an easy routine, moving around each other as if they had been doing this for years instead of just one morning. Xavier found himself watching her from the corner of his eye, noticing the efficient way she moved, the quiet grace in her gestures. After breakfast, they went out to assess the fence damage in full daylight. It was worse than Xavier had thought. Rufus had not just knocked over a few posts. He had created a section of fence that would need to be completely rebuilt from the ground up. 3 days might have been optimistic, Xavier said, surveying the wreckage. "Then I will stay 4 days, or 5. However long it takes to make this right," Rebecca said firmly. Xavier got his tools from the shed and showed Rebecca how to dig out the old posts and prepare holes for new ones. She was a quick learner and not afraid of hard work. They labored side by side in the morning sun, falling into a rhythm of dig and measure and place. "Tell me about your brother," Rebecca said after they had been working for an hour. "What was he like?" Xavier paused, leaning on his shovel. No one had asked him about Thomas in a long time. "He was younger than me by 3 years, full of energy and ideas. He was always sure the next big thing was just around the corner. That optimism served him well in the mines. He could keep going when everyone else was ready to give up, but it also made him reckless. He went into a shaft that the foreman had said was unstable because he was convinced there was a rich vein just a little deeper. He was right about the vein, but the foreman was right about the instability. You must have been very angry at him," Rebecca said softly. Xavier looked at her in surprise. Most people offered platitudes about God's will or being in a better place. Rebecca was the first person to acknowledge the complicated truth of grief. "I was furious," Xavier admitted. For months, I was so angry I could barely think straight. He had thrown away his life for silver, and in doing so he had left me completely alone. But anger fades eventually. What is left is just this empty space where he used to be. Rebecca nodded. I was angry at my father too. He ignored his illness for so long, trying to work through it, trying to provide for me. By the time he finally saw a doctor, it was too late to do anything. I kept thinking that if he had just gone sooner, maybe he could have been saved. Maybe I would not be alone. You still feel angry? Sometimes, Rebecca said, but mostly I just miss him. I miss having someone who cared whether I came home at night. I miss being someone's daughter. Does that sound foolish? No, Xavier said. It sounds honest. They returned to work, but the silence now felt different. They had shared something real, something that went beyond polite conversation between strangers. Xavier found himself wanting to know more about her, wanting to understand what had shaped this determined young woman who refused to give up despite losing everything. By midday, they had removed all the damaged posts and had begun digging new holes. It was hot, brutal work. Sweat soaked through their clothes and the sun beat down mercilessly. Xavier called for a break and they retreated to the shade of the porch. He brought out cold water and leftover cornbread from breakfast. I am not sure I will be able to move tomorrow, Rebecca said, flexing her hands. Blisters were already forming on her palms despite her calluses. Wait here, Xavier said. He went inside and returned with a tin of salve. This will help. He sat next to her on the porch steps and held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Rebecca placed her hand in his. Xavier opened the tin and carefully applied the salve to her blisters. Her hands were small in his, but strong. He could feel the fine tremor of exhaustion in her fingers. Thank you, Rebecca said quietly. She was very close to him, close enough that he could smell the sun and honest sweat on her skin. It should have been unpleasant, but somehow it was not. It was human and real and alive. Xavier finished with her hands and pulled away, unsettled by his own reaction to her proximity. We will work a few more hours, then stop for the day. There is no sense in working ourselves into exhaustion. The afternoon passed in the same companionable rhythm. They worked until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, then cleaned up the tools and returned to the house. Rebecca disappeared into her room to wash up while Xavier started supper. He was peeling potatoes when he heard her door open. Xavier, her voice was tentative. Could I ask you something? Of course. Why did you agree to let me stay? You do not know me. For all you know, I could be planning to rob you in your sleep. Xavier turned to face her. She stood in the doorway of her room, her hair down now and still damp from washing. She looked younger like this, more vulnerable. I could ask you the same question, he said. Why did you agree to stay here alone with a man you do not know? I could be far more dangerous than you are. But you are not, Rebecca said with certainty. I can tell. The way you handled Rufus, the way you offered me the room with a lock, the salve for my hands. You are a good man, Xavier Hartley. You did not answer my question, though. Why did you trust me? Rebecca was quiet for a moment, considering. I suppose I trusted you because you did not try too hard to convince me. You laid out the facts plainly and let me make my own choice. That is the mark of someone who respects others, even strangers. Xavier nodded slowly. And I let you stay because you looked like I felt after Thomas died. Lost and alone and trying very hard to keep moving forward. I know what that is like. I thought maybe I could help. Thank you, Rebecca said simply. Not just for the work and the roof over my head, but for seeing me, for not treating me like a problem to be solved or a burden to be managed. You are welcome, Xavier said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Supper that night felt easier than the previous evening. They talked about small things. The weather, the horses, the deplorable state of the road between Granite and Butte. Rebecca told him about her father's work, the beautiful furniture he had crafted, the way he had taught her to see the grain in wood and work with it instead of against it. Xavier told her about growing up in Missouri, about leaving home at 18 to seek his fortune in the West, about the dream of striking it rich that had driven him and his brother across half the country. "You regret it?" Rebecca asked. "Coming west, I mean. Everything that happened." "I regret Thomas dying," Xavier said. "I will always regret that, but I do not regret the journey. It made me who I am. And this land, for all its harshness, has a beauty that gets into your bones. I do not think I could go back east now. It would feel too crowded, too tame." "I know what you mean," Rebecca said. "There is something about the sky out here, the way it goes on forever. It makes you feel small and significant all at once." "Exactly," Xavier said, pleased that she understood. After the dishes were washed, they sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. Rufus lay between them, finally worn out from a day of exploring the property. The night air was cool and sweet, carrying the smell of sage and grass. "I have not felt this peaceful in a long time," Rebecca said quietly. "Not since before my father got sick. It is strange to find that feeling here with a stranger, but I am grateful for it." "You are not really a stranger anymore," Xavier said. "Maybe you never were." Rebecca turned to look at him. In the moonlight, her eyes were luminous. "No," she agreed. "I suppose not." They sat in comfortable silence until Rebecca began to yawn. She excused herself and headed to bed, Rufus trailing behind her. Xavier stayed on the porch a while longer, thinking about the strange turns life could take. 2 days ago, he had been alone and resigned to staying that way. Now, there was a woman sleeping in his brother's room and a dog snoring on her floor, and the house felt like a home again instead of just a place to exist. The next 2 days fell into a similar pattern. They worked on the fence in the morning and afternoon, breaking during the hottest part of the day to rest in the shade. They ate meals together and talked about everything and nothing. Xavier found himself laughing more than he had in years. Rebecca had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard, and a way of seeing the absurdity in everyday situations. On the third evening, as they were finishing the last section of fence, Rebecca stepped back to admire their work and nearly stumbled. Xavier caught her by the elbow, steadying her. For a moment they stood very close, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist. The air between them felt charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. "Careful," Xavier said, his voice rougher than usual. "Yes," Rebecca said faintly. "Careful." They pulled apart slowly, awkwardly. Xavier busied himself with gathering tools. Rebecca made a fuss over Rufus, who had been lying in the shade watching them work, but something had shifted. They both felt it. That night at supper, the easy conversation was gone. They were both too aware of each other, too conscious of every glance and accidental touch. When Rebecca's hand brushed Xavier's as they both reached for the salt, the contact felt electric. "The fence is done," Xavier said finally, breaking the tense silence. "Your debt is paid, Rebecca. You are free to continue on your way whenever you choose." Rebecca set down her fork carefully. "Yes, I suppose I am." "But you do not have to leave immediately," Xavier continued, the words coming out in a rush. "That is to say, you mentioned you were a good cook and seamstress. I could use someone to help around the property. I would pay you a fair wage. You could stay on as long as you wanted. Build up some savings before you continue your travels." Rebecca looked at him with those amber eyes, and Xavier felt like she could see straight through to his soul. "Is that what you want, Xavier? A hired hand?" "No," he admitted. "No, that is not what I want at all." "Then what do you want?" Xavier took a deep breath. He had been alone for so long, had protected his heart so carefully. But sitting across from Rebecca, watching the lamplight play across her face, he found he did not want to be careful anymore. "I want you to stay because I cannot imagine going back to how it was before you came," Xavier said. "These past 3 days, having you here, talking with you, working beside you, it has reminded me what it feels like to be alive. I know we have only just met. I know it is too soon to feel this way, but I do not want you to leave, Rebecca. Not now, not ever." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I do not want to leave either. I have been dreading this moment all day. The thought of walking away from here from you, it makes me feel like I am about to lose the only good thing that has happened to me in a very long time." "Then stay," Xavier said simply. "Stay with me." "What would that look like?" Rebecca asked. "Us here together, people in town would talk. Let them talk, or we could get married. Not right away, not until you are ready, but eventually, if that is something you might want." Rebecca laughed, but it was a joyful sound. "You are proposing marriage to me after 3 days. I am proposing the possibility of marriage," Xavier corrected. "After a proper courtship, after we have had time to know each other better." "But yes, I suppose I am saying that I would like to court you, Rebecca Kincaid, with the intention of making you Rebecca Hartley someday, if you will have me." Rebecca stood from the table and walked around to where Xavier sat. She took his face in her blistered hands and looked at him seriously. "I would like that very much. The courting and the eventual marrying both. But Xavier, you need to understand something. I am not some delicate flower who needs rescuing. I am strong and opinionated, and I will not be content to just cook and clean and fade into the background. If we do this, we do it as partners, equals in everything." "I would not want it any other way," Xavier said. He reached up and covered her hands with his own. "I fell for you because of your strength, Rebecca, because you walked 3 miles in the heat to apologize for your dog's mistakes. Because you insisted on working off your debt instead of asking for charity. Because you are brave enough to keep moving forward even when you have lost everything. Why would I want you to be anything other than exactly who you are?" Rebecca smiled, bright and beautiful. Then she leaned down and kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, a question more than a statement. Xavier answered by standing and pulling her close, deepening the kiss into something more certain, more real. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Well," Rebecca said, her voice shaky, "I suppose that settles it then." "I suppose it does," Xavier agreed. They held each other for a long moment, adjusting to this new reality. Rufus, apparently sensing that something important had happened, came over and pushed his head between them, demanding attention. They both laughed and the tension broke. "We should probably slow down," Rebecca said reluctantly. "Court properly, like you said. Give ourselves time to be sure." "You are absolutely right," Xavier said, though he made no move to let her go. "But maybe we could sit on the porch together for a while longer," Rebecca suggested. "Just to talk. That sounds perfect." They went outside and sat on the porch steps, closer this time, with Rebecca's head resting on Xavier's shoulder and his arm around her waist. Rufus sprawled at their feet. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, and for the first time in 4 years, Xavier felt like he belonged somewhere. Not just to the land or the house, but to this moment, to this woman, to the possibility of a future that held more than just solitary existence. "Tell me more about what you want," Rebecca said quietly. "Not just tomorrow or next week, but for your life. What are your dreams, Xavier?" Xavier thought about it. He had stopped dreaming somewhere along the way, had stopped imagining anything beyond the next day's work. But with Rebecca in his arms, the future suddenly seemed full of potential again. "I want to make this ranch truly prosper," he said slowly. "Not just survive, but thrive. I want to breed horses, Good, strong horses that can handle the Montana winters. I want to build a barn that is worthy of them. And I want a family. Children playing in the yard, their mother's amber eyes and their father's stubbornness. I want meals around a full table and conversations that never end. I want to be part of something larger than myself again. That sounds like a good dream, Rebecca said. Do you want to know mine? Yes. I want a home. Not just a house, but a real home where I belong. I want to teach, whether that is in a schoolhouse or just at my own kitchen table. I want to use my hands to make things that last, to build something permanent in a world that feels temporary. And I want love, Xavier. Real love, the kind that weathers storms and grows stronger with time. The kind my parents had before my mother died. That is what I want most of all. I think we can give each other these things, Xavier said. It will not always be easy. This life out here is hard even in the best of times. But I promise you, Rebecca, if you stay with me, I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret it. I am staying, Rebecca said firmly. No more talk of leaving. This is where I belong. I knew it from the moment I walked up that road and saw you standing on your porch. I did not understand it then, but I do now. I was meant to find you, Xavier. Rufus destroying your fence was not an accident or a disaster. It was fate. Xavier smiled and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Then I suppose I owe your dog a debt of gratitude. They stayed on the porch until the night grew cold and Rebecca began to shiver. Xavier gave her his jacket and insisted she go inside to warm up. They said good night at her bedroom door, and Xavier kissed her once more, tenderly, a promise of all the kisses yet to come. Alone in his bed that night, Xavier stared at the ceiling and marveled at how much could change in just 3 days. He had gone from resigned loneliness to cautious hope, to something that felt dangerously close to happiness. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The next morning, Xavier woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. He dressed quickly and went to the kitchen to find Rebecca already cooking breakfast. She had pulled her hair back and was humming softly to herself as she worked. The sight of her there, comfortable in his kitchen, in his home, in his life, made his chest tight with emotion. "Good morning," he said. Rebecca turned and smiled at him, that brilliant smile that made him feel like the sun had come out. "Good morning. I hope you do not mind me starting breakfast. I wanted to do something nice for you." "I do not mind at all," Xavier said. "Though you know you do not have to earn your place here. You have already done that just by being you." "I know," Rebecca said, "but I like taking care of you. Is that strange to say?" "No," Xavier said, "because I like taking care of you too." They ate breakfast together, making plans for the day. Xavier needed to ride into Granite to pick up supplies. Rebecca insisted on coming with him. "I should introduce you properly to the town," Xavier said. "Let them know you are staying, that we are courting. It will make things easier in the long run." "Will people judge me for staying here with you unchaperoned?" Rebecca asked. "Probably," Xavier admitted. "But Granite is small and people know me. They know I am not the type to take advantage. And once we announce our intention to marry, I think most folks will be understanding. The West is not as rigid about these things as the East Coast is. People do what they must to survive and build lives here." The ride into Granite took about an hour. Xavier drove the wagon with Rebecca sitting beside him. Rufus ran alongside, occasionally veering off to investigate interesting smells. The town appeared on the horizon, smaller than Rebecca had expected. 24 buildings clustered along a single main street, with scattered houses extending out from the center. Xavier pointed out the important landmarks as they drove down the street. The general store, the church, the saloon that doubled as a boarding house, the assay office that saw less business every year. They stopped first at the general store. The proprietor, A weathered man named William Sanders looked up in surprise when they entered together. "Xavier Hartley, as I live and breathe," William said. "I have not seen you in town in near a month. And who is this you have brought with you?" "William, this is Rebecca Kincaid." "Rebecca, William Sanders. He runs the best general store in Granite." "The only general store in Granite," William corrected with a grin. He tipped his hat to Rebecca. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, miss." "Likewise," Rebecca said. "Rebecca will be staying on at my place," Xavier said, his tone making it clear he would brook no argument. "We are courting, with intention to marry once a proper amount of time has passed." William's eyebrows rose, but he was wise enough not to comment. "Well, congratulations to you both. It is about time someone put a smile on this man's face. He has been going around like a storm cloud for far too long." They purchased supplies and loaded them into the wagon. Word spread quickly in a town as small as Granite. By the time they were ready to leave, several people had found excuses to walk past and get a look at the woman who had caught Xavier Hartley's eye. As they were loading the last of the supplies, a woman approached. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair and a kind face. "Xavier," she said warmly. "It has been too long." "Mrs. Patterson," Xavier said, his face softening. "How are you?" "Well enough. And you must be Rebecca." "I am Martha Patterson. My husband and I run the saloon." She looked Rebecca up and down, but there was no judgment in her gaze, only curiosity. "Xavier is a good man, one of the best I know. You will be happy with him." "Thank you," Rebecca said. "That is good to know." "If you need anything at all, you come find me," Martha continued. "I know what it is like to be new to a place, to try to build a life in rough country. We women need to stick together." "I would like that very much," Rebecca said sincerely. The kindness in Martha's words stayed with Rebecca as they drove back to the ranch. She had been worried about judgment, about being seen as improper or loose. But Martha had offered friendship instead. "She seems nice," Rebecca said. "Martha is one of the good ones," Xavier agreed. "When Thomas died, she brought food by every week for 2 months, refused to take no for an answer. I think she saved me in those early days, kept me from giving up entirely." "Then I like her even more," Rebecca said. Back at the ranch, they fell into the work of unloading supplies and tending to the daily chores. Xavier showed Rebecca how he cared for the horses, explaining each animal's personality and quirks. She proved to be a natural with them, patient and gentle but firm when needed. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. They worked the ranch together during the day, learning each other's strengths and weaknesses. Xavier was patient and steady, good at seeing the big picture. Rebecca was detail-oriented and creative, always finding ways to improve their processes. Together, they accomplished more than Xavier had managed alone in years. The fence they had built together marked just the beginning. They repaired the barn roof, planted a new garden with better irrigation, and started training 2 young horses Xavier had acquired before Rebecca's arrival. The work was hard but satisfying, made better by shared effort and constant companionship. In the evenings, they talked. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their fears, their hopes for the future. Xavier told Rebecca about his parents, who had died within a year of each other when he was 21, leaving him and Thomas truly alone in the world. Rebecca shared memories of her mother, the sound of her singing, the way she had smelled like lavender and bread dough. They talked about books they had read and places they wanted to see. Rebecca had always dreamed of seeing the ocean. Xavier admitted he had never given much thought to traveling, but with her, he thought he might like to explore. "After we have built something stable here," he qualified. "After we have a foundation that can withstand our absence." "Always practical," Rebecca teased, but she was smiling. As the weeks turned into a month, then two, their relationship deepened. Xavier courted Rebecca properly, with Sunday rides into the countryside and carefully chaperoned visits with Martha Patterson in town. But the foundation of their relationship was built in the daily work and quiet evenings at home. Xavier taught Rebecca to shoot, in case she ever needed to protect herself or the animals from predators. She turned out to be a good shot, steady and calm under pressure. Rebecca taught Xavier to cook things more elaborate than his simple bachelor fare. Under her guidance, he learned to make decent biscuits and a beef stew that was actually flavorful. They danced together in the evening sometimes, when the work was done and the dishes were washed. Xavier would hum a tune and Rebecca would follow his lead around the kitchen, laughing when they stumbled. Rufus would watch from his spot by the fireplace, his tail thumping against the floor. "I never imagined my life could be like this," Rebecca said one evening as they swayed to Xavier's off-key humming. "So simple and so full all at once." "Neither did I," Xavier admitted, "but I am glad it is." In late August, they rode into Granite for supplies and found the town buzzing with news. A family passing through had reported seeing signs of an early winter coming. If the predictions were true, they needed to prepare. Xavier and Rebecca spent the next month working frantically to ready the ranch. They laid in extra food and feed, reinforced the barn, and made sure the house was properly sealed against the cold. Martha Patterson helped Rebecca preserve vegetables and meat, teaching her the tricks for making supplies last through a harsh Montana winter. "You are a quick learner," Martha said approvingly as Rebecca carefully sealed jars of pickled vegetables. "Xavier is lucky to have found you." "I think I am the lucky one," Rebecca said. "He took me in when he had no reason to. He saw me as a person, not a problem. That means more than I can say." "Have you two set a date yet?" Martha asked. Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. "We have been discussing it. Xavier wants to wait until spring to give us a full year of courtship. But honestly, Martha, I already know. I knew weeks ago. He is the one I want to spend my life with." "Then tell him that," Martha advised. "Men can be dense about these things sometimes. They think they are being honorable by waiting, but sometimes what we really need is for them to just claim what is theirs." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the first real cold front move in, Rebecca brought it up. "Xavier, I have been thinking." "Always dangerous," Xavier teased. Rebecca swatted his arm lightly. "I am serious. I know you wanted to wait until spring to discuss marriage, but I do not want to wait. I love you, Xavier Hartley. I loved you probably from the moment you offered me water in a locked room. I certainly loved you by the time we finished that fence together. I do not need more time to be sure." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, just looking at her in the fading light. Then he smiled, slow and genuine. "I love you too, Rebecca. I have for weeks now. I just did not want to rush you to make you feel pressured." "I do not feel pressured," Rebecca said. "I feel certain. Marry me, Xavier, make it official. I want to be your wife, not just your partner in work, but in everything." "Yes," Xavier said simply. He pulled her close and kissed her, deep and thorough. Yes to all of it. They were married in late September in a simple ceremony at the church in Granite. Martha Patterson stood up for Rebecca, and William Sanders stood for Xavier. The preacher who traveled between the mining towns to serve scattered congregations performed the service. It was nothing fancy, but it was perfect. Rebecca wore a dress that Martha had helped her make from fabric they had bought at the general store. It was pale yellow, the color of sunshine, and it made her amber eyes glow. Xavier wore his best shirt and had actually trimmed his beard for the occasion. Rufus attended the wedding too, sitting remarkably still during the ceremony as if he understood the importance of the day. After the ceremony, Martha and William hosted a small celebration at the saloon. A handful of townspeople came, bringing food and well wishes. Someone played a fiddle and Xavier danced with his new wife while the small crowd clapped and cheered. Happy, Xavier murmured in Rebecca's ear as they swayed together. Blissfully, Rebecca said. You, more than I knew I could be. They spent their wedding night in their own home, in their own bed. Xavier carried Rebecca over the threshold while Rufus barked excitedly, clearly confused by all the fuss. Inside, the house that had been just Xavier's, then cautiously shared, was now fully theirs together. Xavier had prepared a simple dinner and had filled the house with wildflowers he had picked that morning. It was thoughtful and sweet, so perfectly Xavier that Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. I am not good with fancy words, Xavier said as they ate, but I want you to know that I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to make you happy, Rebecca. You saved me. Before you came, I was just existing. Now I am alive. You saved me too, Rebecca said. I was lost and alone, and you gave me not just shelter but a home, a real home. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Do not be scared, Xavier said. I will be right here always. Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, they came together as husband and wife. It was tender and passionate, nervous and sure all at once. They learned each other in the lamplight, mapping new territory with gentle hands and whispered words. Afterward, they lay tangled together, both of them marveling at the intimacy of it, the vulnerability and trust. I did not know it could be like that, Rebecca whispered. Neither did I, Xavier admitted. But then, everything is better with you. The first winter as a married couple was harsh, just as the travelers had predicted. Snow fell heavy and early, burying the ranch in white. But inside their home, Xavier and Rebecca were warm and content. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other from the small collection of books they had accumulated. Rebecca worked on sewing projects while Xavier carved small wooden figures, a hobby he had picked up from watching her father's work pay off in her skilled hands. Rufus loved the snow, bounding through it like a puppy despite his advancing years. He would come back covered in ice and snow, and Rebecca would towel him off while scolding him fondly. Xavier watched these domestic scenes with a sense of wonder. This was his life now. This warmth, this companionship, this love. In January, Rebecca began to feel unwell in the mornings. At first she attributed it to something she had eaten, but when it persisted for 2 weeks, Martha Patterson rode out through the snow to check on her. I think you might be expecting, Martha said gently after examining Rebecca. The symptoms fit. Rebecca sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. A baby. I am going to have a baby. How do you feel about that? Martha asked. Terrified, Rebecca admitted, and thrilled. Is that strange? Not at all. That is how every woman feels with her first. When Xavier came in from tending the horses, he found Rebecca and Martha sitting at the kitchen table drinking tea. One look at Rebecca's face and he knew something had changed. What is it? Are you all right? I am fine, Rebecca said. She stood and went to him, taking his hands in hers. Better than fine, actually. Xavier, we are going to have a baby. You are going to be a father. For a moment, Xavier just stared at her. Then a smile spread across his face, bright and joyous. He picked Rebecca up and spun her around, both of them laughing. Rufus barked, caught up in the excitement. A baby, Xavier said when he finally set her down. We are going to have a baby. In late summer, Martha thinks, Rebecca said. Are you happy? Happy does not begin to cover it, Xavier said. He cupped her face in his hands. You have given me everything, Rebecca. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I do not have words for what that means to me. The rest of the winter passed with Xavier treating Rebecca like she was made of glass. She had to constantly remind him that she was pregnant, not dying, and that she was perfectly capable of doing normal activities. But she found his overprotectiveness endearing rather than annoying. They spent the long winter evenings planning for the baby. Xavier started building a cradle from scratch, carving careful designs into the wood. Rebecca sewed tiny clothes from fabric she had been saving for a special project. They argued good-naturedly about names, each proposing options that the other rejected with theatrical horror. "If it is a boy, we could name him Thomas," Rebecca suggested one evening, "after your brother." Xavier paused in his carving, emotion flickering across his face. He would have liked that. He always wanted to be an uncle. "Then Thomas it is if we have a son," Rebecca said. "And if we have a daughter, Sarah," Xavier said. "That was my mother's name. She was strong and kind like you. It would fit." "Sarah," Rebecca repeated, testing how it sounded. "I like that." Spring arrived late that year, but when it finally came, it was glorious. The snow melted and revealed the prairie coming back to life. Xavier and Rebecca worked together to plant an expanded garden and to prepare for the foaling season. 2 of their mares were expecting, and Xavier was hoping for strong colts they could eventually sell or train. Rebecca's pregnancy progressed normally. She stayed active, insisting on helping with the lighter ranch work despite Xavier's protests. Martha checked on her regularly, always bringing news from town and words of encouragement. "You are doing wonderfully," Martha said during one visit in late June. "The baby is healthy and strong from what I can tell. Another month or so and you will be holding your little one." The baby came on a sweltering August day, arriving with the kind of determination that made Xavier laugh even through his worry. Martha and Xavier attended the birth together, Martha coaching Rebecca through the difficult hours while Xavier held her hand and wiped her forehead with cool cloths. When the baby finally emerged, squalling and red-faced, Martha wrapped him in a clean blanket and placed him in Rebecca's arms. "You have a son," she announced. "A healthy, strong boy." Xavier looked down at his son and felt something in his chest crack open. The baby was tiny and perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same amber as his mother's. He was the culmination of everything Xavier and Rebecca had built together, the physical manifestation of their love. "Hello, Thomas," Rebecca said softly, touching the baby's tiny hand. His fingers wrapped around hers instinctively. "Welcome to the world." "He is perfect," Xavier said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are amazing. I love you so much." "I love you too," Rebecca said. She looked up at him with exhausted but joyful eyes. "We made him, Xavier. We made this beautiful person together." Martha left them alone after making sure both mother and baby were settled comfortably. Xavier sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Rebecca and the other supporting the baby. Rufus came to investigate, sniffing the newcomer carefully before apparently deciding the baby was acceptable and curling up at the foot of the bed to stand guard. "Look at our family," Rebecca said. "A cowboy, a woman who came to apologize for her dog, the dog in question, and now our son. We are quite the collection." Xavier laughed. "We are perfect. The first months with baby Thomas were exhausting but wonderful." Xavier discovered reserves of patience he had not known he possessed, walking the floor with a crying infant at 2 in the morning while Rebecca tried to catch a few hours of sleep. Rebecca learned to nurse the baby while simultaneously cooking dinner or mending clothes, becoming an expert at juggling multiple tasks. Thomas grew quickly, a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs and an apparent determination to never sleep at night. But even in the most exhausted moments, Xavier and Rebecca would catch each other's eyes over the baby's head and smile. They had created this life together in every sense of the word. Martha came by often to help and to teach Rebecca the things her own mother would have taught her had she lived. The older woman had never had children of her own, and she doted on Thomas like a grandmother. She taught Rebecca tricks for soothing colic and showed her how to make a tincture that helped with teething pain. The ranch continued to thrive under Xavier and Rebecca's combined efforts. They had hired a young man named Peter to help with the heavier work, a decision that gave them more time to focus on the baby and on building up their horse breeding operation. The colts born that spring were strong and healthy, and Xavier had already received inquiries about purchasing them when they were old enough to train. By Thomas's first birthday, the Hartley Ranch had become a recognized name in the area. They were known for fair dealing and quality horses. More importantly, they were known as good people, the kind of neighbors who helped when times were hard and celebrated when times were good. On Thomas's birthday, they held a small gathering. Martha and William came, along with Peter and a few other families from the area. Rebecca had made a cake, and Thomas was allowed to destroy a small portion of it with his chubby hands while everyone laughed and cheered. Later, after the guests had left and Thomas was sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Xavier and Rebecca sat on the porch and watched the sun set. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day. "You remember the day we met?" Rebecca asked. "When I came walking up that road, mortified by what Rufus had done, certain you were going to shoot him or arrest me or both." "I remember thinking you were the bravest thing I had ever seen," Xavier said. "Walking all that way in the heat, determined to make things right. I think I started falling in love with you in that moment, even though I did not recognize it yet. And I remember thinking you were terrifying at first, standing there with your rifle. But then you offered me water and kindness, and I realized you were actually the gentlest man I had ever met." "Life has a strange way of working out," Xavier said. "If Thomas had not died, I would not have been here alone. If your father had not gotten sick, you would not have been traveling through. If Rufus had not destroyed my fence, you might have just kept walking. So many small things had to align perfectly for us to find each other." "I like to think we would have found each other anyway," Rebecca said. "Somehow, because this feels too right to be random chance. This feels like destiny." "Maybe it was," Xavier agreed. He pulled her closer, resting his chin on top of her head. "All I know is that I am grateful for every moment, even the hard ones that led me to you." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night. Inside, their son slept safely. Around them, the ranch they had built together stood strong. And beside Xavier, his wife, his partner, his love, rested contentedly in his arms. 2 years later, Rebecca gave birth to their daughter, Sarah, a tiny thing with her father's dark hair and serious expression. Thomas, now 3, was initially suspicious of this new person, but quickly became fiercely protective of his baby sister. He would sit next to her cradle for hours, telling her rambling stories that made sense only to him. "He is going to be a good big brother," Rebecca observed, watching Thomas gently pat Sarah's tiny hand. "He learned from the best," Xavier said. "You have made him kind and patient." "We made him that way," Rebecca corrected. "Together like everything else." The Hartley family continued to grow and thrive. Xavier's horse breeding operation expanded, and Rebecca started teaching the few children in the area from their kitchen table, fulfilling her dream of being an educator. The ranch became a center of the small community, a place where people knew they were welcome. Rufus lived to the impressive age of 14, before passing peacefully in his sleep one winter night. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Thomas and Sarah both wept for the dog they had never known a time without. Xavier carved a marker for the grave, and they all stood together in the cold as Rebecca said a few words about the faithful companion who had, in a way, brought their whole family together. "If you had never chased after him that day," Xavier said quietly, "none of this would exist." "Then I am grateful for every destroyed fence post and trampled vegetable," Rebecca said, "because every step that led me to you was worth it." Martha Patterson became a permanent fixture in their lives, a beloved honorary grandmother who spoiled the children and provided wisdom when Rebecca needed advice. William Sanders remained a good friend, often joining Xavier for chess games in the evening while Rebecca and Martha chatted. As the years passed, Granite began to revive slightly. New families moved in, drawn by affordable land and the promise of a fresh start. The school that Rebecca had started in her kitchen moved to a small building in town, with Rebecca as its official teacher. Xavier served on the town council, helping to make decisions about the community's future. Through it all, the love between Xavier and Rebecca remained the foundation of everything they built. They still danced in the kitchen on quiet evenings. They still sat on the porch after the children were asleep, talking about their days and their dreams. They still looked at each other and marveled that they had been lucky enough to find this love, this partnership, this life. When Thomas was 10 and Sarah was 7, Rebecca gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Benjamin after Rebecca's father. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with the sounds of children's laughter and family dinners, and all the beautiful chaos of a full life. "We should add another room," Xavier said one evening as Benjamin nursed, and the older children played a noisy game in the living room. "We are bursting at the seams. Or we could teach the children to play more quietly," Rebecca suggested with a smile. "That seems unlikely to succeed," Xavier said. "I will start on the addition in spring." True to his word, Xavier spent the following spring and summer building an addition onto the house. Thomas helped eagerly, learning carpentry skills from his father. Sarah mostly got in the way, but was allowed to feel important by handing tools and fetching water. Benjamin watched from a blanket on the ground, gurgling contentedly. The new room became a proper schoolroom, with a desk for Rebecca and space for her growing collection of books. During the day, she taught there. In the evenings, the family gathered there to read together or to work on projects. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Rebecca with a trip to Missoula, the largest city in Montana. They left the children with Martha for 3 days and took the train west. Rebecca had never been on a train before, and she pressed her face to the window like a child, exclaiming over every new vista. In Missoula, they stayed in a real hotel with electric lights and running water. They ate in restaurants and attended a concert. Xavier bought Rebecca a beautiful shawl from a shop that specialized in fine goods. But mostly, they just enjoyed being alone together, remembering what it had been like when it was just the two of them against the world. "Thank you for this," Rebecca said on their last night in the hotel, "for remembering that we are not just parents and ranchers and community members, but also just Rebecca and Xavier who fell in love over a fence and a troublesome dog." "I never forget that," Xavier said. "Everything else is built on this on us. I love being a father and I love the life we have created, but I loved you first and I will love you always." They made love that night with a leisure they rarely had at home, taking time to appreciate each other without worrying about being interrupted by a crying child. It was different from the passionate early days of their marriage, but it was deeper, richer, informed by a decade of shared life and absolute trust. The train ride home felt too short. But when they arrived back at the ranch and were swarmed by their children, all clamoring to tell them about everything they had missed, both Xavier and Rebecca knew they were exactly where they belonged. The years continued to roll forward. Thomas grew into a serious young man who loved the horses and the land as much as his father did. Sarah developed a passion for reading and learning that made Rebecca's heart swell with pride. Benjamin, the baby, turned out to have his mother's creativity and his father's steady nature, a combination that served him well. When Thomas turned 18, he announced his intention to attend agricultural college in Bozeman. Xavier and Rebecca discussed it seriously with him, talking through the costs and benefits. In the end, they supported his decision. Their son would learn modern ranching techniques and bring that knowledge back to improve the family operation. The day they put Thomas on the train was bittersweet. Rebecca cried despite her best efforts not to. Xavier stood stoically, but his hand shook slightly as he clapped his son on the shoulder. Thomas himself was excited and nervous, ready to start his own adventure. "We raised him well," Rebecca said as the train pulled away. "He will be fine." "I know," Xavier said, "but I remember what it was like to be 18 and heading into the unknown. I just hope his journey is easier than mine was." "He has advantages we did not have," Rebecca pointed out. "Education, family support, a home to return to. He will be more than fine." "He will be extraordinary." She was right. Thomas excelled at college and returned 3 years later with a degree and a fiancée, a practical young woman named Alina who fit into the family as if she had always been there. They were married in the same church where Xavier and Rebecca had wed, a beautiful full-circle moment that made everyone cry happy tears. Thomas and Alina built a house on the far end of the ranch property, and Thomas took over much of the day-to-day operations of the horse breeding business. Xavier, now in his 50s, was content to step back and let his son take the lead. He still worked the ranch, but without the grinding pressure of being solely responsible for its success. Sarah followed her own path, becoming a teacher like her mother. She moved to Helena to teach in a large school there, but she came home for holidays and long summer visits. She never married, declaring herself content with her independence and her work. Rebecca understood and supported her daughter's choice, even though the townspeople sometimes gossiped about the unmarried schoolteacher. Benjamin, the youngest, left at 20 to try his hand at photography, a new art form that fascinated him. He traveled throughout the West, documenting the changing landscape and the people who inhabited it. He sent letters filled with his adventures and occasional photographs of places so exotic they seemed unreal. Through all the changes, Xavier and Rebecca remained the constant center. They grew older together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. Xavier's hair went gray and then white. Rebecca developed laugh lines around her eyes and silver threads in her dark hair. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had met over a destroyed fence and taken a chance on love. On their 25th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. Thomas and Alina had 3 children by then, lively grandchildren who called Xavier Grandpa and Rebecca Grandma, and kept the ranch feeling young and vibrant. Sarah came home for the occasion, and Benjamin arrived with a famous photographer he was apprenticing with, wanting to document the family gathering. Martha Patterson, now quite elderly but still sharp as ever, made a toast. "I remember when Xavier was the loneliest man in Granite. I remember thinking he would waste away out here, too stubborn to ask for help, too wounded to let anyone in. And then Rebecca arrived, chasing after that ridiculous dog, and everything changed. You two have built something beautiful together. Not just this ranch or this family, but a life that shows all of us what love should look like. Happy anniversary." Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Xavier stood and pulled Rebecca to her feet. 25 years ago, my wife came to apologize for her dog destroying my fence. I told her to keep the dog and stay with me. It was the smartest thing I have ever said. Rebecca, you are my heart. You are my home. You are every good thing in my life. I love you more today than I did when we married, and I loved you completely even then. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for staying. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me. Rebecca was crying openly now. I love you too, Xavier. You gave me everything I thought I had lost when my father died. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You showed me what it means to be truly loved. I would walk that dusty road to you 1,000 times over, and I would choose you every single time. They kissed while their family applauded. The children made exaggerated gagging noises while the grandchildren giggled. Martha dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. Benjamin captured it all with his camera, preserving the moment forever. The party lasted late into the night. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Xavier danced with Rebecca, then with his daughters and daughter-in-law, then with each of his granddaughters. Rebecca danced with her sons and grandsons. The whole family swirled together in celebration of the love that had started it all. Later, when everyone had finally gone home or to bed, Xavier and Rebecca sat on their porch in the chairs they had occupied for decades now. The stars wheeled overhead, constant and eternal. The prairie stretched out before them, the land they had worked and loved and made their own. "You have any regrets?" Rebecca asked. "Anything you wish had been different?" Xavier considered the question seriously. "I wish Thomas could have met his nephew and namesake. I wish my parents could have known you and the children. I wish your father could have seen what an amazing woman his daughter became. But regrets? No. Every choice I made, every turn my life took led me to you. How could I regret any of it?" "I feel the same way," Rebecca said. "Even the hard parts, the losses and the struggles, they were all part of the path. And this life we have built, Xavier, it exceeds anything I dared to dream about when I was walking up that road to apologize for my dog. It exceeds anything I dreamed of when I was alone in this house, certain I would spend the rest of my life in solitude," Xavier said. "You changed everything, Rebecca." "We changed everything together," Rebecca corrected gently. "That is what makes it so special. Neither of us rescued the other. We met as equals and built something neither of us could have created alone." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, each lost in memories of the life they had shared. They thought about the fence that had brought them together and all the other fences they had built and mended over the years, both literal and metaphorical. They thought about Rufus, whose moment of canine chaos had set everything in motion. They thought about their children and grandchildren, the living legacy of their love. As the night deepened and the air grew cold, they finally stood to go inside. Xavier held the door for Rebecca, and she paused in the doorway to look back at him. "Thank you," she said softly. "For seeing me that day, for giving me a chance, for loving me so well." "Thank you for chasing after your dog," Xavier replied with a smile, "for being brave enough to apologize to a stranger, for staying when I asked, for choosing this life with me." "I would choose it again," Rebecca said. 1,000 times over I would choose you." "And I would choose you," Xavier said. "Always." They went inside together, closing the door on the night. The house that had once been so empty was now filled with memories and love. In the morning, there would be work to do and grandchildren to spoil and the next chapter of their life to write. But for now, they were simply together, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. In the bedroom, they prepared for sleep with the familiar comfort of long marriage. Rebecca brushed out her silver-streaked hair while Xavier removed his boots. They moved around each other with practiced ease, each knowing exactly where the other would be, each anticipating the other's needs without words. When they finally settled into bed, Xavier pulled Rebecca close. She fit perfectly against him, just as she had from the very first time they had shared this bed as husband and wife. Her head rested on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, their breathing gradually synchronizing. "You remember our first night here?" Rebecca asked sleepily. "How nervous we both were. I remember thinking I had never wanted anything as much as I wanted you," Xavier said, "and I remember being terrified I would somehow ruin it." "You did not ruin anything," Rebecca assured him. "You made everything better. You still do." "So do you," Xavier said. Every single day, they drifted toward sleep together, secure in the knowledge that they would wake up together in the morning, just as they had for 25 years and would for whatever time they had left. It was not dramatic or flashy. It was simply real and true and deep. The years continued forward as years do. Xavier and Rebecca grew older but no less devoted to each other. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th. Their grandchildren grew up and some of them started families of their own. The ranch prospered under Thomas's management, incorporating the modern techniques he had learned in college with the traditional wisdom Xavier had passed down. Sarah eventually returned home to Granite when the town finally established a proper school. She taught there until her retirement, shaping young minds just as her mother had done. Benjamin's photography became well known throughout the West, and his work was featured in magazines and exhibitions. But no matter how far he traveled, he always came home to the ranch for Christmas. Martha Patterson passed away peacefully at the age of 83. Her funeral was attended by everyone in Granite and many people from neighboring towns. Xavier and Rebecca grieved deeply for their friend, who had been so instrumental in helping them build their life together. They named their next grandchild Martha in her honor. William Sanders retired and sold his store to a young couple from back east. He spent his remaining years playing chess with Xavier and telling stories about the old days when Granite had been a wild mining town. When he died, Xavier was one of the pallbearers, honoring a friendship that had lasted nearly 4 decades. On their 40th anniversary, Xavier and Rebecca took another trip, this time all the way to San Francisco to see the ocean. Rebecca had dreamed of it since childhood, and Xavier was determined to make that dream come true while they still could. They stood on the beach together, holding hands, watching the waves crash against the shore. The vastness of it was overwhelming and beautiful. "It is just like you said it would be," Xavier said, watching Rebecca's face as she gazed at the Pacific Ocean. "It is more," Rebecca said. "Everything with you has always been more than I imagined it could be." They stayed in San Francisco for a week, exploring the city like young people on an adventure. But they were both relieved to return home, to the familiar rhythms and beloved landscapes of their Montana ranch. In their 70s, they finally slowed down. Thomas took over completely, insisting that his parents had earned their rest. But Xavier and Rebecca could not fully give up the work that had defined so much of their life. They still tended the garden together. They still sat on the porch every evening. They still found ways to make themselves useful. "We are terrible at retiring," Rebecca observed one day as she helped Xavier repair a section of fence. It was not the same fence where they had met, but it was on the same property, and doing this work together still felt significant. "We built this life together," Xavier said. "Why would we want to stop now?" But eventually, age caught up with them as it catches everyone. Xavier's joints grew stiff and painful. Rebecca's eyesight began to fail. They moved slower, rested more, accepted help with increasing frequency. But their love remained constant, a bright flame that age could not diminish. On a cool autumn evening in their 51st year of marriage, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The sun was setting in shades of gold and amber, painting the prairie in colors that seemed almost unreal. "It has been a good life," Xavier said quietly. "The best life," Rebecca agreed. "I would not change a single thing." "Not even Rufus destroying my fence?" Xavier asked with a smile. Rebecca laughed, the sound as warm and genuine as it had been when she was 25. "Especially not that. That was the beginning of everything good." They sat in silence, holding hands, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Around them, the ranch hummed with life. Their children's children played in the yard. Smoke rose from the chimneys of the houses that dotted their land. Horses grazed in fields bordered by fences they had built together. "No regrets?" Rebecca asked, echoing a question from years earlier. "Not a single one," Xavier confirmed. "You?" "Only that we cannot live it all over again," Rebecca said. "But I suppose once is enough if you do it right." "And we did it right, Xavier. We did it exactly right." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they stood and went inside together, just as they had done for over half a century. The house welcomed them home, warm and familiar. In the living room, their great-grandchildren were being read a story by Sarah. In the kitchen, Thomas and Alina were preparing dinner for the extended family. From somewhere, upstairs came the sound of Benjamin's laughter as he entertained the youngest generation with tales of his adventures. This was their legacy. Not just the land or the buildings or the successful business, but the family they had created, the love they had nurtured, the life they had built from nothing but determination and devotion. It had started with an apology for a troublesome dog and an offer to stay. It had become a love story that would be told by their descendants for generations to come. That night, Xavier and Rebecca fell asleep in each other's arms, knowing they had done something rare and precious. They had found each other against all odds. They had chosen love when it would have been easier to choose safety. They had built something beautiful that would outlast them both. And they had done it together, day by day, fence by fence, moment by moment, for more than 50 years. The woman had come to apologize for her dog. The lonely cowboy had said, "Keep the dog and stay with me." And she had stayed, and they had loved. And their love had created ripples that spread out in ever-widening circles, touching everyone around them, proving that sometimes the most profound moments in life begin with the simplest words and the bravest choices.